Hey everyone, and welcome to the episode I for Imitation of our ongoing alphabetical taboo busting journey, which some have pointed out is a bit of a mouthful, but it's getting into habit, so it's all good. So unlike a lot of the other things that we've discussed here, imitation might not strike you as much of a taboo. Yet when we confront people about their imitation, they often get defensive and they talk about a lot of things where we've, as a society or as an industry of professionals, we've packaged imitation as something to aspire to in many ways. And if that's sort of bewildering to you, don't worry, we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail in a second after I welcome my good friend Sylvia, as always, to the show.
Hello, my friend. Good to be here with you as always.
Absolutely. No, I'm really excited, Celia, to talk about this because not only does it touch upon so many different aspects, but as both of us have talked about in the past, feeling like outsiders in a lot of corporate environments, I actually see imitation as being quite a big part of that because, there's such a wide scope for the justification of imitation.
Hmm.
You see people talking about inspiration and imitation almost interchangeably,
Yeah.
where you model your behavior after someone else, you step into these processes, and especially like we've talked about before in sales,
Hmm.
where people just want you to fit into that tiny box of what a salesperson is supposed to do, how they're supposed to dress, what they're supposed to say. And it's interesting to see that juxtaposition between what I would see as inspiration versus
Hmm.
imitation, where I actually don't see them as completely separate.
Mm.
Because to do what I do very often and bring a music analogy into this, when I was finding my voice as a musician, there was a lot of imitation involved, I'll fully admit, because I would find the things that I liked in different artists and I would figure out what makes them sound like that, what gives me this feeling. I would
Hmm.
figure out how to do that, but I
Hmm.
wouldn't then go, right, I'm only going to write songs like these people do. It was picking up things from here and there and building into a cohesive thing that ends up being uniquely yours. But I think in the professional world, this isn't encouraged as much as it is in creative ventures. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And as you were reminiscing or thinking back along your musical, producing and creativity journey, I thought back to a moment of talking to a fellow sales manager. I pulled him aside one day. I go, "Why do you do what you do, or why do you act the way you do? Why do you behave the way you do? Because it's not pleasant. Like I've heard from other people that your behavior is actually very off-putting." And so peer to peer, I'm just letting you know, I really want to understand where this is coming from, right? Are you struggling at home? Is there something else going on? How can I help you? And his answer was literally, "That's what my manager did. I'm doing exactly what my manager did," which blew my mind. In a way, I'm like, okay, you're a grown ass adult, and like becoming a leader means you have to make some decisions as to what's good for the team and what's good for you, as you show up for the team. Yeah, it was like, well, that's just what was taught, or I literally just copied and pasted
And I
the
think
person who came before me. And yeah, I think it was the first time, for both sides, right, of me confronting that and him feeling like someone was needing some justification, or some like needed him to defend that. It was a very interesting conversation, which I'll share more of. But let me pause here and get your thoughts on what just transpired.
so. This really rings true for me in so many levels, and I think we've talked about in past episodes sort of the roles we fall into in life, and how often if we don't become aware of them, we start repeating history. And it's something that it really reminded me of a company I used to work for, where I saw certain behavior in like middle management, and then I joined middle management, and I saw it above me in those people, and then I went higher, and then I was working with all the directors, and I started seeing just almost like a generational, almost cult-like behavior of repeating the same
Hmm.
phrases, using the same inspirational speeches.
Hmm.
People picked up each other's inflections and like all these things where I thought, is there a single original thought in this team? And like, it sounds really harsh, but it's just, for me, I was really uncomfortable with this expectation that some of them had, that you had to fit into that mold. And it's just, it's worrying how, to your point, this person had never been confronted about this, probably because if we look across society as a whole, this is pretty accepted.
Hmm.
People fall into the same behavioral patterns within families, companies, and it is that cult-like sense of being,
Hmm.
being a part of the flock, belonging to a herd. And it's something that really, it's really intriguing and scary at the same time to me.
I agree. I mean, there's something about imitation that is so contradictory to belonging, individuality, inclusion. Like, there's something about that that I think is taboo in a sense of when we call it out. I think it does trigger some of these perhaps new and uncomfortable insights for the person receiving it, but it's also uncomfortable to dig into, like, how is it that you as a grown adult did not really consider, by imitating, are you actually denying yourself who you are, who you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to act? Do these things even align with your values and virtues? Like, there are all these, I think, questions that come up that bar us from really looking at, is imitation really the most sincere form of flattery, right? Is that really the sincerest form of compliment that you can give to somebody? And I'll just add to what I said with a story. I remember leaving a company and then calling the company back like 3 months later because of something or another that I needed to chase down. And I called one of my former colleagues, and I'm not exaggerating. Her voicemail was exactly like mine. Now, granted, mine was different. So I like, and I created it, so I know that it's mine. It has my signature, quote unquote, signature all over it. It was very Sylvia-istic. And this person literally lifted it, you know, put it in her own phone and replaced it with her own name. Now, what was so jarring was it had none of the Sylvia-ism, because she's not Sylvia, right? That's just by way of us being two different individual humans. So it sounded really awkward. Like, and maybe I'm a little biased in that, like, I was like, this is not my voice, yet it's my words. And I talked to her about that. I said, hey, listen, like, what's up with that? Like, she's like, well, I just love what you were saying, and I just love the way you use words. And I'm like, and she then even said, I thought I was paying you a compliment by doing that. And she thought my issue was with the copying. Like, she thought I didn't like people copying or taking my words, or what is something that is kind of a signature to myself. And I said, no, it's not that. It's the fact that you have nothing that speaks to who you are here. This is now generic. You have generic sized it. And that's what I have a problem with. But she was very, I think, defensive about how she was like, well, I meant it well. I was paying you a compliment. This is me showing you that I really liked what you did. Yet yeah, it was very, like, just, yeah, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. It was mind blowing in a way, yet not unexpected as well, like that she would have that answer.
But I think, if we tie that back to the last episode about identity and home really sort of tied into one, that's something that I'm always wondering about, because I had a super similar experience to what you just had. And I know I've told you this story, but where I left the company, and a few months later, I was visiting a friend of mine who worked in reception, and they kind of sighed and said, this guy in the company is trying to do a John, but
Mm.
it's not quite working. And they turned their computer screen towards me and showed me that this person was doing what I'd always done, which was I sent out updates to the company about, these people are doing really well, or these people are just almost at target or something. But I'd always like handcraft these really silly, cheesy memes. I put jokes in, footnotes, really craft them with a lot of love, while still not spending a lot of time, because, I had a lot to do and I had MS Paint on my laptop. But in a way, I think I do understand that from a certain perspective, it is flattering. And there's a part of me that thinks, wow, I did leave a mark on these people. I did
Right.
leave something where they're like, this is now a part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, it's flattering. But I guess, again, to reference back to last week's episode, I wonder if those people feel at home in that role, or if it feels more like a hotel. Because at the end of the day, like if I'm trying to fit myself into the role of someone else, like even if I take that to the most literal extent I can in my own life, like when I was literally acting on stage and on camera, getting into a role always included what bit of myself do I bring to this role? It was always, how do I take what's written here,
Mm.
well, which was easier if I wrote it myself, but obviously
Right.
that wasn't always the case.
Right.
But if someone else had written it, it was spending time with that person, understanding the viewpoint of that character,
Mm-hmm.
and then finding those parallels. And I think even if we take the acting bit out of it, there are certain expectations that are held towards you in any role in life, whether you're a manager or a
Mm-hmm.
salesperson or something. But
Mm-hmm.
it's about finding that parallel, finding that resonance. What bit of myself can I bring to the table to stand out from the crowd? And I don't just mean in terms of being loud and out there in terms of standing out of the crowd. I just mean so that you feel at home, so that people see
Mm-hmm.
the real you, and that you can take inspiration from others, but that you don't try to become them.
I know we've talked about this notion of people literally copying and pasting other people's work on LinkedIn. I know we just had this conversation not even a month ago. And some argue, right? They go, I was just really inspired by that person and I didn't want to change a thing about it. And I just wanted to showcase it to the world because it really tugged at my heartstrings or it really inspired me and it got me thinking a new way. And to that, I go, great, credit the person, right? Just put, give credit where it's due. That it's as simple as that. Yet that whole notion of imitation to inspiration, I think that's exactly what you were referencing a moment ago in that, right? If you have no effort or no focus or commitment to add the bits of yourself from, so look at it as a journey, right? So A is just as it is, right? Whatever someone else created that you could imitate in whole, in totality. So that's A over here. And then, let's call it C over here. From A to C is, C would be like you marinating, right? You really created something that has bits and parts of A, but it's uniquely you. And B is really then the process, and I know we're going to talk about that as sort of the third part of our discussion today, but there has to be some processing, some creation, some filtering, right? Again, like back to the first example I gave, this guy, I mean, it's not to say that his copying his manager is wrong in of itself, because there were probably a lot of great tactics that
Yeah.
he picked up, and who am I to discount them? Yet what he didn't do was part B, which is to distill, to filter, to go, okay, so and so taught me all this. Now that it's my turn to lead and show up for a team, what parts of so and so can I borrow and be inspired by, and even double down on those and amplify? What parts can I leave behind, right? However, as part of the same conversation. And I feel like a lot of people, for one reason or another, don't believe in part B, which then cancels out part C or completely, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible because you didn't go through the process. Yeah, there's something about that notion of you really have to, to truly be inspired, to show that inspiration, there has to be some work around it versus just lifting and borrowing.
And I think, that whether we're talking about content or the way that you act at work,
Mm.
if you don't bring that element of yourself, you're not bringing anything new to the table, and even if we look past whether you feel at home or not,
Mm.
it kind of reminds me of people who don't want to give any content away for free because they think, oh, why would anyone hire me if they have like this PDF? It's like, well, if everything you offer can be summed up in one PDF and then everyone can do it, maybe find a way to position yourself a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I feel like, your example of someone going, right, well, this is how my manager did it. It's part of that same sort of toxic, this is what we've always done scenario. If you do what you've always done,
Mhm.
you'll get what you've always gotten with diminishing returns.
Absolutely. And I know right before the show, we talked about this idea of that, how rampant that scenario or the phenomenon is in hiring, right? So people literally just want clones. And yet they wonder why they don't achieve diversity, diverse thinking, diverse outcomes, just diverse faces and voices. It's because they go, well, we just so we hired this guy or gal and it worked brilliantly. And we don't really know why or how they were able to be a top performer, but like we're just going to look at their appearance, their behaviors, and hope that we make sense of it and then clone those things.
Yeah.
And I see that happening also in sales management and coaching, right? Where a sales manager might literally say something to their team to the effect of, just say what I say. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? If you want anyone to be a strategic thinker, if you want someone to really be a trusted advisor to a client, if you want people to have original thought to creatively solve problems, and your ask is that people just copy you, what do you, what do you
Yeah.
think is going to happen?
But it's funny to me on two different levels, because like you're saying, if you're just giving them, effectively, it's the same thing as giving them a script and just going, just say these things and you'll make a sale.
I got a story about that. It will blow your mind. I don't think we've talked about this, but I legit witnessed a sales manager taking out a metronome to someone's mock pitch. A metronome. For those of you who are not musically inclined, that is a machine that sets the tempo. But so you scroll this thing, it sets a number, and it's literally how many beats per minute, roughly speaking. And this guy literally, not only did he ask his reps to say exactly what he would say, he required them to say it in his tempo. He even had a number on the metronome.
Wow. So, like, part of me is thinking, like, if this was an original thought, again, if
Right.
you were a CEO of a company and I come in with like a metronome and an egg timer and I go, right, this is my pitch, and I turn both of them on and I finish on tempo and in
Right.
time for the egg time to ring, it could be a bit of a power move, not gonna lie, a bit of BDE, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really resonate if everyone's doing it. Can you imagine having the fourth person come in and do that? You're like, wait, are you all on 135 BPM? Like, interesting. I was expecting some pianissimo.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I mean, it's I think the intent was good, right? What he was trying to impart was, there's a cadence, there is a tenor, there is a way to be effective in speaking. Yet what he was not able to reproduce or to really impart was these other more strategic things. I mean, he was not really a teacher in the truest of sense, or at least not a coach in my definition, in that the whole idea of coaching someone to better performance is using what they've got and to up leveling those raw ingredients that someone would have. And to assume that everyone has to be at a certain tempo when all of us have different speeds with which we speak. Yes, there is a best practice when you're engaging, of course. Yet, yeah, there's something really off about that for me, in that instead of, right, if you haven't really even taught what I would call the cognitive bits of why you're pitching, what the story is supposed to do, how do you affect outcomes, how do you ask thoughtful questions, if you haven't worked on those other things and you are banking on someone's success on a metronome, well, guess what? You likely will chase away the people who would have been able to be coached to greater performance if you had leaned into those other areas that I just referenced and many more, or you're only going to hire people who can answer to a metronome.
Yeah, and either way, we've all heard someone speak in a way that they're not comfortable with, and that's not really what you want in a sales
No,
conversation.
no,
I'd
no.
rather I'd rather have someone who sounds comfortable and confident and might have different varying tempos in their voice. Because like
Mhm.
look at some of the greatest speeches in the world. They weren't delivered to a metronome. They had pauses that probably at the time felt awkward, but grabbed people's attentions. And it's kind of hilarious to me as well, because you were talking about finding those patterns where you're like, oh, we hired someone like this, we should hire someone like that again. And I've seen that where people focus on like entirely the wrong things. In the same business I referenced earlier, I remember someone coming in for a sales job alongside university, and they were studying like sports theory or something, some sort of like athletic book learning. It's not really my thing, but
Right.
they were studying something like that, maybe sports management or something. And I basically said something like, I don't see that being a good or a bad thing. The guy came like appeared like he would be a really good addition to the team, great attitude, this and this, and it was it's an entry level role, didn't really require sales experience.
Mhm.
And one person on the team said something like, yeah, we had someone come in for a job once who studied sports management or something, and they were excellent at their job. I was like, is that it? So are
Right.
you
And
saying we should send our recruitment people just into that department of the university and be like, hey, this one time back in the day, someone studying this was a good salesperson. Let's get everyone on board.
I mean, it's what I call cognitive laziness. At the end of the day, all this is it's I think largely rooted in either cognitive inability or cognitive laziness. I like to think that we're, a little bit more cognitively able than maybe some of the scenarios that we just talked about had demonstrated. I think it's laziness, right? To go, well, we're just going to find that one thing. We're going to take that one pill. We're going to drink that one elixir, and bam, right? Like magic. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think sometimes what bothers me again the most about imitation is not so much just the imitation itself. I really do think as someone who appreciates people's thinking, I think it's
Mhm.
the lack thereof that really troubles me. It's like,
Yeah.
and it goes back to exactly what you opened with around this idea of how sad is it that you don't even want to bring yourself to the table, or you think you have nothing to bring.
Mhm.
And that we know that's not true. Out of 7 billion people, we all have different stories, different perspectives, different filters through which we process ideas and scenarios and interactions with others. Yeah, like I think at the core of it, I think why I feel so hot and bothered by imitation is that I'm sad. I'm actually, I pity, right, the person who literally goes, I don't even have anything to bring, or what I have to bring isn't worthy, so I'm just going to take on the shell of somebody. And I really want to help people not stay in that mindset.
Yeah, and I think, to me, it's probably about three things that I think can wrap us up quite nicely here. The first one being, like you said, that feeling of not having anything worth sharing. And I can relate to that feeling. I pushed off creating content on LinkedIn for ages, even though I was constantly being told by people that I was coaching or helping, they were like, oh
Right.
man, like you should
Yeah.
create content around this. I'm like, oh, no one cares. And it's easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the second thing is, I think there is that laziness to it from a lot of different angles, because in many ways, imitation is often sold as a get rich quick scheme or get
Yeah.
successful rich quick
Yeah.
scheme, because it's, oh, just do exactly what I do and you'll like 10 times your earnings. And this was not meant as a slight at Grant Cardone. I realized afterwards it sounded like that, but still, admittedly, people in that area of the world or that vein, it will very often say basically, do exactly what I do and you'll get there. But usually they do it with the caveat of do these processes, but do them as you. You know, Gary Vee might say make, you know, thousands of pieces of content, but he doesn't say do it while swearing on stage and talking on TikTok. He says, you know, do you, be
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but I think what stops a lot of people from doing that, and what pushes a lot of people into the imitation game, to drop a little reference in there, um, is really the fear of next week's episode, J for Judgment. You know, what a nice segue, right? You know, and I love
Almost.
ruining a good segue by calling it out as a segue. It just seems such a good waste of good potential that I could have just continued speaking, you know. But to get back to it, yeah, so next week, you know, we want to talk about judgment, and I actually think these two being next to each other is quite monumental, because it will feel like a continuation of this, because so often we do fall into that habit of thinking, what do others expect of me and how can I fit that role,
Mm-hmm.
or how can I fit my identity into a role, and sort of almost corner off other parts of myself in order to fit the norm, fit the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying everyone does, but I think we all have that from time to time, and it's going to be really interesting to dive into that and look at judgment from a few different angles.
Agreed. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation with you next week.
Absolutely, likewise.